Good morning. Ooh, baby. Get that coffee right in there, right at the front of the show, the header of the show. Happy Friday, everyone. Happy March 20th. Hope you had a really great St. Patty's Day. We're here for a solo midweek episode of the Transformational Leader or of the live show. If you're watching this Friday and it's live, then obviously I've got very exciting news for all of us. This is news for all of us. Big news. I have replaced my microphone cable. That's what I do as a leader. I talk about something needing to be fixed. I continue to bump up against it for a year and a half, and then I change it. Boom. Change has happened. Transformation is possible. It was never really bad enough. If I didn't bump the cable, then it didn't make that fuzzing noise. Then I said to adjust it, so I kind of let it just sit for a while. But that's been replaced. So that's some pretty exciting news, I know. Got some cool topics today. I'm going to talk about commitment, conversation, and then the cost of keeping our options open. Why? Why does it cost us something? Why can't I just keep my options open forever? Is the question that I have. I wish to have all options until the end of time. Why can I not do this? That's a pretty good accent. Maybe. I went to a community theater show. What was it? Wednesday, I guess. Yeah, 2 nights back, and it was community theater AF. It was maximal community theater, and bless these people. Like acting is hard, and that was one of the things I really appreciated from this show. And a few of these people on stage made big choices. Big choices, like one person chose an accent that I felt might be not even a little bit, but like quite a lot out of his range. And but it's cool. The opportunity for me in these situations, I can sit down and be like, oh brother, this is gonna be horrible to get through, or I can just sit and be like, I'm gonna enjoy this for what it is. And once I settled into that, I had a great time. I chortled, I chuckled, I delighted in the accent that he had chosen. So it was a cool experience. And then last night, Bay was over in Vancouver watching Les Mis. So talk about going from like, the sort of one end of the spectrum of stage craft and talent to like the very other end, the very top. Les Mis is incredible. All right, well, let's have a sip. Let's see if I can scratch my eye without getting goo on my glasses. I think I succeeded. We'll have a sip together. Simultaneous sippage. Mm, lovely stuff. A little half calf for me today. What's in your mug? What's in your mug? My friends keep looking at me and they're asking, what's in your mug? Mud water. You guys remember those ads? Mud water. It's mushroom coffee. My friends never look at my mug and they never ask me, what's in your mug? That's just not the kind of friendship I have. And I question that guy's friends. Are they his friends? Does he have a history of drinking weird stuff and that's why that's happening? Do your friends look at your mug and say, what's in your mug? I doubt it. What kind of mug is he drinking out of? Is it a transparent mug where you can see the mud water? And if so, why wouldn't they just assume it's coffee anyhow? These are questions that I have. So overall, I'd say advertising campaign failed. I'm going to go ahead and put that on out there. Tai Chi campaign, much better. Pooing breaks your colon. Tai Chi heals it. Walking breaks your bones. Tai Chi heals them. I like these claims that they're making. Anyhow, I should talk about something of more consequence. So, alive for me this week. There's a couple things alive for me this week. One is I'm in I'm in the enrollment outreach phase for the intensive, and historically, the way that I've invited people to my stuff is kind of off the cuff, off the side of my desk. It's not been very focused. It's been fairly almost like lackadaisical. And I would say that it worked because I'm driven enough. So I didn't have any of it systematized. There was no real process. I would just kind of like remember and then like in between a call, sort of like send a message to 5 people loosely. And what I'm taking on this time is I really want to bring a bunch of people into this room. I'm really excited for this upcoming intensive. I think it's going to be quite a special one. And so I want to fill that room. And in order to do so, I have to get a little more systemic in my approach. Not necessarily meaning I turn it all over to robots and they robot people into being in the room, more in the sense that I have resistance to inviting people to my stuff, not because I'm afraid of them being in the room, but because I struggle to be with the rejection of their no. So creating a systemic approach can be really helpful because anytime there's resistance to something, a system, like a structure basically, helps us consistently confront that resistance. If I have like, hey, it's Monday, you get up and you invite 10 of the people on the list of 80 people that you created, start. That reduces a lot of the mental clutter and a lot of the obfuscation and a lot of the stuff that can get in the way of just taking the action that forces me into confrontation with my resistance. Whereas if I'm like, I'll do it when I remember, I'll probably invite the people that are easier. I'll probably avoid the people that might feel a little edgier to invite. I'll probably hit the number sometimes, other days just not. Whether or not I actually invite those 10 people, like whether I hit my goal, will probably be way more influenced by my feelings in the moment. Whereas one of the things that structure and systematization does really beautifully is it moves our feelings out of the picture. And like, I'm not suggesting feelings are bad or wrong. I'm just saying that like there's a result I'm committed to creating regardless of my feelings day to day. And that's the place that I'm choosing to approach this from. So that's been kind of cool, to just get really clear, like, okay, every Monday I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to set aside time in my calendar for conversations about this. And the approach I'm taking is not to so much as invite people into the intensive yet, but to send them a message inviting them into a conversation about it if they're interested, which is if you've gotten one of these, you probably already know, I've probably invited you, but the gist of that is, hey, we're setting something up. I think it's going to be really cool. If you're I don't know if you're interested or not, but if you are, I'd love to have a conversation where we just explore what might be possible if you were in that room, what might open up, what it might allow or provide you. So it's an invitation for them to discover more in a conversation with me. Very, very simple, almost lower stakes in a way, because they're saying no to the conversation. We're sequencing a little bit more, and because their yes will actually be in a little more informed, right? Because typically, if you invite people to an event, what they're going to look to see, do the logistics clash? Okay, good. They do. I don't have to think anymore about this. I can clear my mental overhead. Blah 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 blah. So that's been the approach I've been taking, and there's like a couple things I'm alive to internally as I do that. The first is it feels empowering to really stand in the place of, I'm stoked about this. I would love to have you there. Do you want to have a conversation about that? That feels a lot more empowering and stronger than historically how I've done it, which is sort of like, hey, by the way, not sure if you knew, but we're doing this thing. It'd be cool if you could come. Less of a powerful invitation and a little more cushioned against the rejection. I don't know if you can hear it in those words, but it's sort of like the way I'm inviting is like, it would be cool if you could come. So there's less of a like, I would like you there. Do you want to talk about that? More of a, if it works out, whatever. It'd be neat if you came to my party, but whatever, right? There's a safety in that. So I'm leaning more into the bold ask, which allows for more choice on the part of the other people that I'm inviting, and then lets things be, unfold the way they unfold. The second thing that I notice in this process is that, one, I'm at the stage where I'm sending out a lot of invites, but there's not a lot necessarily coming back. Some people respond, some people are like, I can't. And a lot of people just don't respond, probably because most of the time because they're just busy and everyone is just like, ugh, emails, I can't handle it, right? You can probably relate to that. And then sometimes because they don't want to devote the mental process to discerning whether this matters or don't know how to say no. All of those are totally fine. They're totally fine objectively. Subjectively, the silence has been challenging for me because I make it mean, they don't want to come, but they're not even willing to tell me that. I create all of this story about it. And so then the next part of my systemic approach is wait a couple weeks, reach back out. Hey, not sure if you caught this, just want to bump it up. Totally fine if you're a no, just let me know either way. And that's been really cool because it has me sort of like a lot of people are like, oh yeah, thanks for responding. I actually missed your first message, or I didn't even see it, or didn't even land in your inbox, or whatever it happens to be. So that's kind of like, it's cool when our assumption or my assumptions are checked. Like, oh wow, look at all the stories I was making up. That's cool. So that's kind of nice. The flip side is that some people still don't respond, and some people are just like a no, which is the second thing that I'm noticing is starting to come online. Is right now I've been in a lot of inviting people, but as time goes on, people start to come back, and I get more no's. And one of the coaches I've always admired, Steve Chandler, he would, when it came to building a practice of any sort, he would say that yes lives in a land of no. And so if a coach is coming to him and saying like, hey, it's so hard to get clients and I'm not making it work and I don't understand, blah, blah, blah. He'd ask them, how many no's have you gotten this month? And they'd be like, oh, like none. Well, that's your problem. Like if you're not getting no's, you're not making any requests, you're not proposing anything to people, and you can't get a yes if you're not doing that. So yes lives in the land of no. Really powerful place for leadership, for people in sales, really for life. But I don't like those no's. And so I there's a part of me that's kind of alive and maybe a tad vigilant to the fact that I'm empowered about the approach I'm in right now, but I'm a little nervous about, oh shit, there's going to be a wave of no's that come back that like, start to make me hate humans across the board or something like that. I don't have to do anything with that right now. I can just allow it, like just notice it and then let that happen. And when that happens, then that's the next thing I bring to my coach to get supported with. Hey, I'm creating a bunch of story around these no's. Can you support me to like see the whole entirety of that and then create a more empowering story so I can get back to what I'm committed to, as opposed to getting caught in the story and the feelings that I build up about what no means. So that's the journey that I've been on as of late. It's been, yeah, it's been quite fascinating to work with and to watch. Okay, let's move on to our topics. I'll have a sip first. So the first thing, all of these topics are going to tie into each other. We're going to talk about commitment first, and then we'll talk about conversations that clarifying conversation, and then finally we'll talk about the cost of keeping your options open. These are all kind of like similar angles. So the big headline I want to put onto the table with regards to commitment is that most people assume commitment comes after clarity. So the way they hold it is like, first I know, or I'll know, or once I know, then I'll decide, and then I'll move. Knowing is the first part of that. The trap there is that in most parts of your life where that really matters, that's not actually the sequence that happens. The sequence that happens is that we don't become ready and then commit. It's that once we make a commitment, the commitment begins reorganizing us. And in that reorganization, commitment actually starts to create our clarity. So the way this sounds kind of like in practice, the not committing in practice is like, things are just a bit too crazy right now. Or let me wait until I can think a little bit more about this and settle down. And Dave, hey Dave, good to see you. Dave writing, just read the caption ahead of this talk, and it's been a while since I've been tagged without getting tagged. Did I tag you by accident? Or I think I understand what you mean. Like the caption kind of speaks to you, perhaps. Yes. So things are crazy right now and I need them to settle down first, or I need to wait until I know, or I've just, there's a million different versions of this, and they're all totally fine. And the important thing is that there's times when this is wise, but like a lot of these sort of places where we get caught, the trap is that it has like validity some of the time, which is why we get caught. Because what is going to happen is our safety hooks on to the fact that sometimes there's validity here, and then that becomes the frame we get stuck in. So what's often happening for people is that the certainty is often a disguised kind of demand for self-protection. It sounds wise, strategic, measured, planned out. Waiting for clarity, however, is kind of just like refusing the vulnerability of being changed by something out of your control. And that's what commitment sort of puts into your lap. When you make a commitment, suddenly you're on the hook. You can't squirrel back to the safety of waiting or of knowing or any of that. You now actually have to take some actions, and those actions will happen in the face of the unknown, because that's where commitment lives. So the demand for certainty can end up being a little bit less about wisdom and more about insulating ourselves. It lets us delay exposure while still sounding reasonable. And this is why it works so powerfully to keep us safe. This is why we do it so often, is because it sounds wise, it sounds reasonable, and it preserves our existing identity. Meaning, if I wait longer, I don't really have to confront too much. I can continue to be in the experience, the space, the whatever that's there. Okay, so that's the first part. What I would say is that once we actually get into a state of commitment, once we make a commitment, what happens is that our perception alters. The act of committing to something, and I'm not talking about the sort of commitment we do, which is like January 1st, I'm going to get fit. That's a fake commitment, and most of us know it. We believe that we're honest, like we're honest in that commitment. We believe it, we want it, but we don't actually put anything on the line. And real commitment has a cost to it. Real commitment means you put money down, or you devote some kind of energy, or you rearrange your calendar, or you do whatever you have to do, but there's some energetic exchange with yourself and the universe, if you like. So once you actually make that commitment, the way you look at things changes. You start asking different questions, because instead of asking questions like, is this really worth me doing? Your question becomes, given I've committed to this, what do I now need to do? So it completely shifts the way you relate to and look at how your life is showing up. So you ask different questions, you notice different obstacles or relate to them in a different way. You stop evaluating from the sidelines and begin participating from inside the reality. And what this does is, if you have two people, one who is committed and one who is not, they will experience the exact same circumstance completely differently. They will live inside of it radically different from one another. The committed person becomes more resourceful, more creative, more present, more honest with themselves, not because commitment guarantees their success, but because it changes the quality in which they show up. The way that they engage with the thing shifts. And it changes what people are willing to risk, face, invent. It breeds creativity and all of that. Have a sip here. This is also why dabbling produces pretty weak returns. People that are reliable for dabbling, often, I'm one of these people, or have been historically, would describe themselves as jack of all trades, master of none. And what dabblers can do is we tend to become very good at the early part of the learning curve. So we can plug into something, we can go from beginner to maybe intermediate pretty quick. But that's the point where the early kind of beginner's luck, or whatever you want to call it, starts to fall away. And there's a requirement to actually show up differently. You actually have to make some moves. You have to put more energy. You have to actually make a commitment to the thing to move beyond that point. And so what happens when we dabble that way is it doesn't cost us much. It allows us to leave the self, the identity, the ontology, the whatever you want to call it, mostly untouched. So, you've had this experience maybe in yourself or with other people. When someone's half in, they kind of largely remain unchanged. They get to keep one foot outside of the fire, evaluating. Am I going to, or am I not going to? Will I now, or will I not? And because they're not fully in, very little of them has to reorganize. There's no requirement to do so, because there's no necessity, because there's no commitment. So they can gather information, learn about, understand, discover, but don't get transformed. And one way to think of this is what happens is they preserve optionality. Optionality meaning like these are the choices I have in front of me. I'm preserving those choices, but it comes at the cost of depth. That's that idea. Jack of all trades. I can do many, many, many things, but I'm master of none. I don't actually create the depth. Now, here's the thing about commitment is I already mentioned it is costly, but part of what it is like what's costly about it is it closes doors for you. And this is part of why people resist it. As long as I remain uncommitted, I can preserve choices, I can keep doors open, I can preserve my identity. I can kind of like hold open the idea like I'm someone who could do this. I'm someone who could take that choice. I'm someone who could maybe make that thing that one time, that someday. So we get to hold on to our existing identity. Whereas when you make a commitment, you're actually closing doors to the other options and you have nowhere to go but through. And, those identities can be like, I'm the smart one, I'm the capable one, I'm the one with the options, I'm the one who might still do something greater. And what real commitment does is it threatens all of that. Because now you have to be answerable. Now you can actually be seen. And now something's real at stake. Now you are going to be unable to avoid facing and seeing the thing that is getting in your way. So commitment really calls you to the mat. And the final thing I want to say on commitment is that there's things that we cannot understand pre-commitment. And that's part of what happens when we're like waiting, when we're trying to get clarity, is we're trying to gain an understanding of the stuff that can only become kind of lodged in ourselves, that we can only really get on the other side of commitment. Because, not because you're dumb, but because that understanding is downstream of the commitment. Because the commitment, remember, changes us. It changes the way we relate to things. So the caveat here is we can't think or understand our way into certain forms of leadership, intimacy, transformation from the outside. They only become visible once we are inside the structure. And there's just certain forms of knowing that are only really truly available after the exit ramps are gone. This is why it's almost impossible to learn to ride a bike like properly with training wheels on. We give kids training wheels, but there's a point where you have to take those wheels off and kids have to fall over. And it is very, very rare. If you ever grew up on training wheels, it's very rare that a kid gets to the point where they can fully balance and you take off the training wheels and they're good to go. I don't know. I've never heard of that instance because training wheels take away the need for you to commit to balancing. And you can't actually learn the balance on that side of the safety that training wheels provide. So it's very similar to this. So this is our first part, right? This is the commitment piece. We cannot wait our way into commitment. And we'll talk a little bit more about what waiting costs and all of that. But for now, the next thing I want to start to bring in here is this idea of like a conversation that clarifies. So commitment's one thing. Commitment's like, are you going to do this? Are you going to do what you have to do to make this possibility available, to put this on the plate? Are you willing to close the doors, take away the exit ramps, take away the offshoots so that you can go all in? There's a conversation before that happens, and that is the clarifying conversation. Excuse me. Let me drink coffee. So the clarifying conversation is like, well, it's a little bit like a conversation about exploring like what might be available in the intensive, that kind of conversation. It's not a conversation that requires a commitment. It's a conversation that sheds light on the stuff that might be important to know once like you want to make a commitment. So ironically, the clarifying conversation is kind of the like, would you like some clarity? I want some clarity before commitment. Oh, here's a conversation that might provide that. Not always, because the thing about waiting for clarity, again, hopefully you're getting the point here, is there's always going to be more clarity you could seek. There's always going to be more, whatever the thing happens to be that we're waiting for prior to the commitment. Always. That's the nature of how the animal works. But there are conversations that can provide a lot of clarity. And what happens is we avoid those too. That's the pre-commitment conversation. So why would we do that? You may be asking, and I am delighted you would say that. And so what this is about is like avoiding the conversation that would make commitment or decision harder to postpone, harder to put off. Sort of like as long as something seems vague, it's easier to just keep pushing it into the future. I've noticed like a lot of people, there's many reasons for this, but a lot of people keep stuff at bay that would, all it would do is bring things a little more clear to them. And part of what this kind of supports in humans is, as long as things stay sort of vague, it's easy to just keep pushing it down the road. Once we start to bring it closer and make it really clear, it becomes harder to push off. And that's dangerous. So these sort of clarifying conversations feel dangerous because they threaten what we are protecting in ourselves. They threaten the sort of like, I don't know, maybe I'll consider it, because they actually put us to a point in our lives where we might have to make a decision. And if we don't make the decision, we have to turn and face the fact that I'm the sort of person that won't make that decision. I'm the sort of person that says no to that. Whereas previously I got to be the sort of person that, yeah, like maybe someday, sometime. And those kind of decisions, what they do is they force us to reconcile with how we're showing up in our lives, which we would rather not do. If we don't have to reconcile with that, if we don't have to turn towards and face something in the full light of the day, then we can kind of preserve the safety of being someone who, you know, all of those identities I mentioned earlier. I'm the smart person. I'm the person that's totally down for transformation, just not yet. I'm the sort of person that's all about leadership, and I'm totally going to do a program at some point. I'm the sort of person that absolutely takes care of themselves, but just after I take care of my kids and blah, 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 blah. Anytime there's a conversation that brings that sort of stuff into light, it makes us harder to keep the decision at arm's length, because bringing something into clarity brings it closer. It forces you to look at it. And that forces you to actually confront how you're showing up. Now, the truth is, there's amazing freedom in facing this. In all of the transformational work I've done, all of the healing, the underlying kind of arc of the work is very similar across like parts work, ontological coaching, deep healing-based transformational leadership, recovery work, plant medicine, you name it. The underlying arc is very similar, which is have people turn and face the way they are showing up in their lives, and have them face it absent their story, and learn how to forgive and hold themselves with compassion. We resist the crap out of that. We don't want to do that. And the way we resist it is this vagueness. As long as I keep something at arm's length and don't get that clarity, I don't really have to turn and face and look at the way I'm showing up in my life. I don't have to reconcile with that. But the healing can only happen when we do that. Transformation and leadership only become available when we actually turn and face the thing. And once we turn and face the thing, what initially happens is we are like, oh yeah, I mean, I know I hate people that lie or that break the law, but I speed, but that's different, and here's why. And until we can kind of face like, yo, you break the law and you make excuses for it, just like these people do. Their excuses might be different. You might be able to create a different story, but you're actually doing the same thing. Until you can face that, you can't have empathy and compassion for yourself. And until you can have empathy and compassion for yourself, you can't have it for other people, and so on and so forth. So all of this work is about bringing us to face that. And the clarifying conversation is a beautiful metaphor, or it's like emblematic of why we like don't get to transform as much as we say that we would like to. It's because we are resistant to the kind of clarity that is required. This kind of vagueness preserves more optionality, right? It allows us to keep our options open. If I keep things vague, I don't ever have to choose. I get to remain in Schrodinger's maybe, like maybe I'm going to do that someday. It's definitely on my list at some point. That often feels safer than truth, but it also feels safer in a cloggier, clumsier, clunkier kind of way, because then we have to hold all of this energy of like maybe someday, perhaps once in a while, we've got all this stuff instead of actually creating ourselves as someone really at choice for who we be. And this idea that a lot of people fall back to sometimes called, that was clumsy, let me word that better. Sometimes what people call discernment is actually controlled non-participation. So they tell themselves that they're being thoughtful. And indeed, sometimes they are, but sometimes they're staying just far enough away that nothing in them actually has to move. So they're, the fancy way you might call this is they're relating to possibility, but they're not letting possibility relate to them. They're holding possibility out there at arm's length, like, yeah, maybe one day, blah, 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 but they're actually not really letting it in. They're not actually allowing it to help them choose or to make choices. So these are the kind of conversations I'm talking about are not conversations that force you to act. They're conversations that force you to see more clearly. Not by someone grabbing your head and sticking it in the toilet bowl, but just because the conversation by its virtue is it's gonna make more clarity. And that's why they matter, is they bring things into clarity for you. And this is why people avoid them. Usually when we're in avoidance, there's some degree of truth that we are holding at bay, because holding that truth at arm's length allows us to preserve something. It allows us to be safe. It's not because clarity forces action, because it doesn't. It's because clarity removes certain forms of hiding. And so that's the sort of thing that we put in front of a commitment, because as long as I avoid the conversation that might create clarity, then it's easier for me to push off commitment. And as long as I push off commitment, I don't really have to, I don't really have to relate to myself as the sort of person that actually chose no. I get to be the person that I am totally committed to leadership or better parenting or whatever, just after, at some point. One of the things that's been interesting this round of practicing enrollment, one of the edges I'm leaning into is naming the pattern I've noticed with people that have been circling around something for a little longer historically. So the way that I've, how can I word this? The way I learned to enroll and to work with people, initially I was like, I'm pretty smart. I can see a lot. And so I would see something over there for that person, and then I'd bash them over the head with it. And I wouldn't really be connected to the relationship. I would sort of, once I saw something, I was like a bulldog who couldn't let go. I'm just like, you got to do this. And this is why you're not doing it. And you're blah, 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 blah. And so it took a long time to let go of that. A long time. And where the journey for me at that point in my growth was really to index in the other direction, to really let go of what I saw and soften and just honor people in their process and really trust them. And that was hard work, because I can see, like a lot of people with a lot of brilliance, they can see a bunch. The challenge that we have is that we see it as the truth rather than a truth. And so I had to learn how to hold this in the lens of a truth. This is a truth, not necessarily the truth. And then relate to people through that lens and honor their all that stuff. And what I notice now is that now that I've gotten really adept at that, I'm a little over-indexed in that way. And there's coming alive for me some opportunities for me with people to honor their process, to preserve the relationship, but then to practice naming the pattern I'm seeing as a way of bringing a little more clarity and inviting them into a conversation about it. So take a sip here. This is an edge of my art. I'm learning I learned the bulldoze, then I learned just let it go completely. And now I'm learning to integrate and to sew those together and all of that stuff. It's practice. What I don't want to do is offer that to people in such a way that they feel closed, that they can't receive it, that they feel like I don't care or love them or whatever. And therefore I index all the way in the other direction. So this can look like, for people that have been in a conversation with me for 1 or 2 years, not making them wrong for it, but reflecting like, hey, I notice, it's sort of like something we keep circling. And if this is something you really want to make happen, I'd love to get on the phone with you and support you to like, how can we set it up so that this can actually happen for you, as opposed to it being a sometime, someday, maybe. And that's edgy for me and for them. It's edgy for me because of all of what I just shared. It's edgy for them because that is bringing some clarity in front of them. And it's inviting them into a conversation that shifts this from vagueness and maybe someday to, are you actually going to be a person that finds a way to commit to this? Like, does this actually matter enough to you? And it really is okay if they're like, no, this doesn't matter enough to me. And that's my truth. But the thing I'm noticing seems to be a real challenge for people is to come to that truth internally for themselves. There's an edginess to turning and facing that. And part of the thing I'm committed to, and this is a growing commitment as I zoom in on like, what is the Forge? What is my body of work really about? Part of the thing I'm really committed to is disruption and rupture. And those words sound maybe violent. The second one in particular, rupture. What I mean by disruption is your pattern's going to keep you going in your pattern. And until something disrupts that, it's not going to change. Now you can wait until life throws cancer at you or takes, someone important from you, or until, you break your leg doing something and suddenly the options you had are gone. That's a form of disruption. That's a high gradient disruption. That's like you're going along and then, like shit, right? It can grab you. I'm committed to providing people a bit of a lower gradient, but I'm still committed to creating that disruption for people. And that's what these things we're talking about today are about. Commitment disrupts your pattern. Once you make that commitment, you cannot continue in the same pattern. And that's why it creates a shift for you. The conversation that clarifies disrupts things because you can continue on the same pattern, but now you're alive to what's actually happening. Now you have more clarity. And so it's sort of like you can't unsee the strategies and the patterns and the consequences of it. That's disruptive. What that does is it ruptures the safety of the pattern repeating itself. So this is like part of the edge where I'm practicing with this is inviting more of that clarity and creating more of that clarity, but doing so from an absolute commitment to honoring the person and the relationship they're in. That's the new edge. Let's see what you wrote here, Brooke. Brooke says, hello, Brooke. All of what you are speaking of is where I currently live and working to get out of, as you are well aware of. Well, Brooke, I would put back to you like you're practicing. And, I know Brooke, everyone from the Forge, amazing, amazing leader. I see you practicing, Brooke. And, it sounds like you're recognizing places where that edge is still alive. But you are in a structure where you are getting supported with this, where you are practicing. And I see you learning how to make that choice and bringing yourself into more clarity. And so that, as we say in our work, is hashtag GFW. Great fucking work. Dave, hello, Dave. Dave saying, same, Brooke. In addition, I'm in the position where I know I need to prioritize other commitments for real for a time. But I feel like a light is on all the times. I just didn't commit. Yeah, I so get that. Okay. So let's go to our third part here, which is we've talked about the nature kind of commitment and how we avoid it. And we've talked about the conversation sometimes in front of it. It's the conversation that clarifies. Next, I want to talk about the hidden cost of keeping your options open. So yeah, commitment, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, conversation, clarity, whatever. But why not? What's the cost of keeping my options open? So the first thing we want to really underline here is that most people experience optionality. That's having a lot of options. They experience that as freedom. So it's sort of like as long as nothing is decided, they feel untrapped. And there's a truth to that because commitment boxes you in. That's the power of it. So people can imagine multiple futures. They can preserve their flexibility. There's sort of like I could do that, or I could do that. I could take drum lessons, or I could be a dancer, or I could. There's sort of like a freedom, infinite choices, but it's not free. And the trouble is that it occurs like it is. We are more often present to the benefit of it rather than the underlying cost. And optionality does have a cost. Avoiding choices, preserving experience of optionality, all of that comes with a cost. So the first cost is that it keeps us shallow. It keeps us shallow because we don't go all the way in, because we are keeping one foot on the shore while we put another foot in the canoe. And so we're, if we hang out in this metaphor, you can get like a bit of a sense of what it's like in a canoe, but you never get fully at the risk of upending the canoe, dumping yourself into the water, learning how to balance, everything that would be required if you put yourself fully in. And so because we don't go all the way in, we never have to reorganize. We don't have to build around this new path or even discover the new path. And we get to stay and hang out in that kind of evaluation mode, sort of like sitting off to the side and being like, do I agree with that? What do I think? Do I agree with that is different from, whoa, what am I going to do with this? That's a totally different question. It's like the difference between if you get some feedback and you say, do I agree with this feedback? Yes or no? That's not really being committed to development, the same as this is the feedback I've gotten. What am I going to do with it? If I fully tried on, if I put on this feedback and put it to work for me, what would I do with it? That's a totally different state to operate in. So it keeps us shallow. What open options do is they preserve identity as much as opportunity. So it allows me to stay as like the person who might, right? I might write the book. I might make the leap. I might do the deep work. I might become that version of myself at some point down the road, at some point. But remaining a possible self is way safer than becoming an actual one, because remaining a possible self doesn't ask any change from us. It just exists intellectually. It just hangs out up here. So we can kind of like flirt with this idea. We can flirt with the concept. We can kind of hold it. We can even, listen to podcasts. We can read books. We can collect ideas and be like, oh, cool. Yeah, I'm the sort of person that, but it never has to be tested. There's a lot of this in corporate executive leadership, an insane amount. Because what is typically going on there is a lot of people that really want to deliver leadership training to those that they lead, but are not interested in having their leadership developed. And so they're not really committed down this path. There is also a freak ton of this in the coaching profession. Coaches that are not fully committed to the path of coaching because they're not working with their own coach. They're not working in their own containers with their own teachers. That's okay. That's not to call them out. It's just to acknowledge that this cost is alive in the world, and you can probably see it and or have had an experience of it over there, but maybe not so much internally. So while we get to keep that identity, the real cost is this kind of it's a funny kind of suffering that comes from chronic deferral. So the way this works is that, first of all, life continues to function manageably. Like our life for the most part is manageable, and we have problems that pop up and they feel dramatic in the moment until they get resolved. Like, what am I going to do? And then that kind of goes down until the next one pops back up. And it's often like a similar kind of problem, but it'll be dressed in different circumstances. And it just becomes a part of the cycle. If you look back, like a lot of times it's kind of funny. I'll ask people, especially if I'm in conversation long-term with someone, they'll be like, oh my God, things are really rough. And then we'll talk next time and they'll be like, yeah, things got better. And I'll be like, oh, what do you attribute that to? And they're like, yeah, I just decided to stop worrying about it or something like that. And then the next time though, that the problem comes along, for some reason, they haven't just decided to stop worrying about it until they decide to stop worrying about it. And so the cycle of problem, drama, need things to settle and then settling down just kind of persists. And even though I use the word drama, I would say like generally down this path of chronic deferral, nothing really looks dramatically wrong. Things feel fine. Life moves forward. There's nothing really to complain about much. It's easy enough to be like, yeah, it's fine. It's good. But what happens is that things for people seem to get thinner. That's the best way I can describe it. The other way I like to describe it is like color starts to drain out. Like colors, the colorfulness of someone's life becomes a little bit less vivid. And it's like, it's not that they don't have access to play or joy or fun or abundance or whatever. It's that those experiences that they want become available in pockets of experience, in circumstances that they create. Like, yeah, no, I get to have tons of fun in my life. Like I go on a vacation twice a month, and when I'm playing soccer or when I'm hanging out with my kid, the experience, the fullness of what it is to be a human shrinks down to these moments. So it's still available. They can kind of reach for it, which furthers this idea of like, well, why bother deferring or why bother choosing? Life still functions. Nothing looks dramatically wrong. I have access to all that stuff. It's the thinness. Life just loses some of that fullness. It becomes a little flatter, a little less alive. And what we get is a life that works, but has stopped opening. So life continues to work down this path. This suffering, you can see, hopefully, it often doesn't occur like suffering. It's just like a low grade experience of somehow something not quite being there. That's the cost of this. And that cost is it's really tricky and hard to get our hands on because it's invisible at first. It doesn't announce itself dramatically. Instead, it shows up sort of like a low grade drift off of your path. And that leads to kind of an experience of repetition, maybe of diminishing aliveness, a life that works, but again, has stopped opening. The other thing that's kind of interesting about this is that the more we do this sort of postponement, the more we start to relate to our life through the postponement. And what that means is that these ideas that we have, these options, we start to relate to them more and more, not through like a decision to be made or a here and now or a commitment. Instead, it be like, yeah, one day, maybe. And then that just becomes more and more a part of the fabric of how we show up to things. Yeah, one day, maybe. And then one day, maybe becomes like, yeah, maybe not, until eventually it just starts to drift away. You know, it's like everything's drifting away from us into the fog, at which point we forget about it. Now, a note here, if you're like, man, he's hammering on these people, I want to be super clear. The people that have this experience tend to be very high performers, because high performers like this guy, we're prone to overvaluing optionality. And our competence, our ability to get a lot done and to be efficient and to be optimal, it's taught us that keeping leverage matters. And it's allowed us to kind of do a lot without having to commit and close very many doors. So for some people, if they don't close doors, their capacity to produce is lowered because there's just too much to manage. High performers are able to kind of like, it's like they drive their car higher up in the RPMs. They can produce more while keeping those doors open. They're taught sort of that it's wise not to close doors prematurely. But eventually over time, that instinct becomes a way of never fully entering into anything that would actually change them. So it becomes unconsciously a way of being that holds them as they are and has them resistant to change. So the question here, the really powerful question here, is that at some point that question is not really about what you lose by choosing. It's what you lose by continuing not to choose. What do I lose by continuing not to choose? And you know, like, what's the vitality that you lose? What's the honesty? What's the intimacy, the momentum? What's the self-respect? Maybe not self-respect in the sense of like, I'm a scumbag and I hate myself, but self-respect in the sense of like your ability to trust yourself to do what you say you're going to do. And these are the things that slowly get eroded, like a river or an ocean just slowly putting waves against a rock. Slowly, this sort of stuff gets eroded. And that's the low grade kind of persistent kind of suffering that comes from that chronic deferral. So it's not the nicest thing, but again, we have to turn and face this. If we don't turn and face this, what happens is that we can fool ourselves over and over and over again until we reach a point and we look back and we go, whoa, how did I end up here? What happened? I guess I'm not going to do that thing. And that's the end result of this is, I guess I'm not going to do that thing. You start to give it up. Okay, let me take a sip here and see where I want to go from here. So all of what I've been describing the latter half here, that's the cost of commitment. All of that safety, all of keeping our doors open, all of not having to really confront what is going to be changed inside of us, all of that gets put at risk when we make a commitment, when we really lean in. And what commitment does is it sets a fire under us in a way that is unavailable any other way. And that fire, it moves us towards the next thing that we want. That's the beauty of commitment. There's people that have chosen into the intensive as an example, and it's really cool. Or even like the retreat, or any of these programs, the Forge. The moment they pay their invoice is the moment I start to get a bunch of emails from them. Up until that point, crickets. Once they pay that invoice, that's when they start to share with me, hey, I've got some fear. Hey, I noticed this is showing up. Hey, people tell me, Adam, I really want to make you, like, I would love some of your support. Excuse me. Like, just how can I? But what happens is they resist that. They resist reaching out. I tell them, yeah, by all means, reach out anytime you like. I'd love to support you. But they don't, because they have a story about what it would mean, or they're trying to manage my time. They don't want to be annoying, et cetera, et cetera. Once they make the commitment, they stop, that story goes away. They stop being willing to sit in that. And that's when their transformation really begins. So we can't underline enough the potency of commitment and what it does for us. It's really where everything begins to shift. Okay. If any of this is like resonating for you, if you see yourself in anything that I'm speaking to, the intensives for this moment, this opportunity to cross that threshold in your lives. So if you'd like to talk about it, reach out to me, reach out to Bay. Happy to share more about it, to explore it with you. But that's the intention. That's why we create these containers, is so that people can turn to this stuff and confront it and face it. And like we've said here, one, that clarifying conversation might be edgy. And two, the moment you make the commitment is the moment things really start to shift. Let's see if there's anything else I want to speak to before we wind down for this week. We've got, what do we have coming up here? I have absolutely nothing coming up, and I'm very excited about it. Cool. Okay, that's where I want to leave us today, is just actually want to leave us in the tension of what commitment costs us and what keeping our options cost us. So hope you enjoyed the show today. If you have feedback, if you have questions, if you want to have me clarify or elaborate on something, let me know. If you have people that you think would be amazing guests, or you would like to be one, please let me know. I always love hearing that. And otherwise, thanks, Brooke. Thanks, Dave, for hanging out. Thanks, everyone, for listening after the fact, and have an amazing weekend. Bye, y'all.